Professor Daniel Bar, who's hosting this session, he will be introducing the speaker. Professor Daniel Bar is very prominent in many areas in Israeli education, but very relevant for many of the people who are attending this conference is that he is the editor-in-chief of what I think is the most important journal in Hebrew about teacher training. It's called Dapim, and it is published at the Mofet Institute. And you will have an opportunity to meet Dan at one of those sessions, like I told you with Barry in the morning, of meet the lecturer. So that will be tomorrow, I believe, right? The session. And Professor Inbal, בבקשה.
Thank you. I have to have it in written so I can show it to my mother. I have a lot to say about globalization, but Tzvi is better in speaking and has much more to say, much more soundly. So I want to call Tzvi Bekrman, School of Education, University of Jerusalem, and I will try not to disturb him, and we'll have questions and hopefully answers as well afterwards. Tzvi Bekrman, please.
I hear so much presented in English that I read directly from the presentation. So this is going to be boring and partially heavy. Forgive me or go to sleep. Two wonderful options. They're both very humane. They work in different directions. Forgiving is humane towards me, sleeping is humane towards you. So here we go. I hope this works. So the name, as you can see, is the global versus identity and culture. All lose, and please pay attention to the question sign at the end of the title of the conference. I'm not sure it was the idea of the organizers, but I suggest to put it there. Anyway, now we go. No, there we go. Science, the social sciences, should not assume that people are dead, nor should it help to choke them to death with categories that do not reveal the rich lives and struggles, all, of those who appear to be alive. And do join me in saying Amen. And yet, Linnaeus helped race became a scientific fact, Darwin helped race become an evolutionary fact, Mendel helped race become a genetic fact, and following the invasion of psychology, identity, ethnicity, culture, and more became facts too. Funny they have when considering that culture from the Latin cultura culturae means work, as in agriculture. An identity is a math property which states a plus 0 equals A, or A times 1 equals A, or as in A equals A. Some new words: the global, the local, and the glocal. The global points to the increasing economic, cultural, and social integration among countries and regions in the world. The process, the outcomes of which are yet to be realized, reshapes the local, for it is articulated and mediated by national forces with their incumbent economic, cultural, and social constraints. The glocal refers to the forced dialectics between those two seemingly contradictory developments, within the context of the global, a variety of discourses on identity and culture have evolved. We are told that the local sustains an illusion of fixed boundaries and the impression that the borders, first proposed by the Renaissance, reinforced by the Enlightenment and institutionalized in the 19th century, are indeed an artifact to be seriously considered by humans in general and the social sciences in particular. Within this context, it makes sense to speak about identity and culture and to be ready to die for them. We're told the global, the transnational, the cosmopolitan is around and engages our imagination and asks us to reconsider the illusion of fixity, offering in exchange volatility, fluidity, and uncertainty. The global, with its double pass of tolerance to the reduction of differences, unites, reconciles, and can bring peace and coexistence, or so we are told. Critics would strongly point at the resemblance between global definitions and those through which modernity or modernization are characterized. Critics could suggest that no great difference is to be found between the global today and European nation building, the local today, capitalism and colonialism, which can be characterized as spreading transnational networks. We ask, could it be not different at all? Nasehi suggests that the difference rests in the cognitive shift that has taken place and by which observers see the world different and perceive it as being globalized. Global moves might not be as new as we may think of them. What seems to be really new is that us, interactants in the 21st century, we have a sense of being global. Yet, not all share this sense. Only the lucky ones, the ones that can still expect a brighter future, not many of us left. The ones that travel, the ones that have computers, the ones who participate in the social networks where we can fashion ourselves every time anew. Understood this way, globalization can lead to important educational questions regarding the way globalization is constituted in diverse educational settings. This presentation starts with several concrete graphic examples. I'll review ethnographic data on the use of identity, culture, and memory. The review should lead us to reconsider the potential of education conducted under the influence of global forces to overcome conflict. Before the appearance of the global, anthropology, for the most part, was equipped with the theoretical assumptions needed to overcome essentialized perspectives. Anthropology does not allow us to take refuge in the illusion that we can ever find the authentic, the real bearer of an original culture or identity. Anthropology has advanced the idea that there is no essence to culture by emphasizing the identification of contextualized relational processes as opposed to the identification of contents. Keep in mind the word process and content for education. It has shown the vainness of searching for things out there. This anthropology take is not always welcomed. In a world torn between global-local tensions, interactants can perceive these approaches as an attack on their sociopolitical realities and their perceived needs. Denying the essentiality of identities and cultures can be perceived by some as a political position in support of the dominant societal forces. By supporting a global perspective in a very local world, asserting them can be interpreted as supporting unnecessary divisions in a world going global. Now let us take a look at some examples, first those that clearly anchor in the global. In John and Jane Kameroff's new book, Ethnicity and Company, a worldwide craze by which ethnicity groups are selling their natural identities to global tourists is described. The sale of this identity ethnicized and cultural products is the only left exit from global marketplace-produced misery, a last resort to find viable means of survival. Take, for example, the North Catalan economy, as it appears in their website and described by the Kameroff as the inspiration of identity. It says, the identity sector of the North Catalonian economy represents a new open-mindedness that will see an expansion based on the culture of the region as an alternative to globalization. The Catalan identity is a collective sentiment, a vision of the communal world, a language, a culture, a lifestyle. Becoming less local, it can now rediscover itself and find new forms of expression. Kameroff asks us to note the reference to the identity economy. The Catalonians who are deploying the identity economy in pursuit, they say, of a renewed sense of collective sentiment by recuperating past modes of production as an alternative to globalization. It is globalization that brings about the turn and opportunity. The global begets identity and culture. One other example, 2 angels on the Amazon, Peru. The website reads, "Welcome to the land and life ways of the Shipibo. Experience the Shipibo way of life for yourself in the heart of the Amazon basin with the Peru Ecotourism Adventure. Learn how to make Shipibo ceramic artwork, go spear fishing in the Amazon River, and much, much more. Find ancient Shipibo remedies for various illnesses ranging from the common cold to cancer, believe it or not, cancer, and receive visionary consultations from licensed Shipibo shamans. Chat with a Shipibo in Peru via email, instant message, or phone. They can manage even Skype. Once more, tradition is offered as a lineable form. Here is indigenous knowledge that inheres in Shipibo identity and culture, ceramics, remedies for illness, both trivial and dire, licensed shamanism, even a way of life. In this case, though cultural products and practices are directed explicitly at consumers of the exotic, of spiritual reclamation, a jungle adventure. There are examples which work in contradictory directions. Note the case of Finland, where the era of globalization seems to have initiated also an era of cultural protectionism by raising educational standards to civilize minority cultures so as to better control national borders and foreign or indigenous influences. Note now the activities of organizations like the Suama Santi Nuorat, a Sami movement that protests the exploitation of their culture and its images by government and commercial ventures in Finland. Its members have demonstrated at the Santa Claus theme park, and their internet lists a series of indignities, from fake shamanistic ceremonies and lappish winter fantasies to playing cards depicting Jolly Sami characters as drunken, drugged, or deranged. The global can both beget and oppress identity. In any direction we move, identity and culture can produce a problem or a solution, a problem to social cohesion, a solution to social schisms, or the other way around. Now we move to the local, with a global shape, the global. We move to the 6 existing Palestinian Jewish bilingual schools in Israel. These are more detailed examples, for they belong to my own research. The schools serve a population of approximately 1,000 students, who for the most part belong to the middle upper classes of professional and merchants in Israel. The population easily represents the ones who are lucky to belong to a global sphere. Time is short and will not allow to show all existing data. I'll just mention in short my understanding of an event which took place in the context of an in-service training session of Jewish and Palestinian Israeli teachers who teach in bilingual integrated schools, while they are discussing and learning about issues which relate to the Palestinian and the Jewish historical narratives, and in events which took place when these same teachers were teaching related issues in class. I will just note that in the events I'm alluding to among the teachers participating in the workshop, we saw that it was for the most part the Jewish teachers, the ones that resisted the attempt to create symmetry between the Holocaust and the Nakba. And it was the Palestinian teachers, the ones that demanded it, as if in symmetry they would reveal the identity recognition that has been in their view denied from their plight. Somewhat surprisingly, it is these same teachers that in classroom activity go into great efforts so as to present the Holocaust not as a unique Jewish tragedy, in a sense working towards some type of balanced symmetry. The global offers both the opportunity to relax identity cultural tensions as well as the opportunity to reinforce tensions through emphasis on difference. When not only history but also identity makes its appearance, things get even more complex. Teachers often express the need to support the goals stated by parents. I'm not asking to turn the school into a religious school, but I would like to strengthen the Jewish identity of children, said one of the Jewish teachers. Palestinian teachers express similar views. The wider context is mostly Jewish, so we have to be careful not to allow the weakening of our students' sense of identity. Because of parents' and teachers' concerns regarding the children's proper understanding of their own national, religious, and cultural traditions, some curricular and ceremonial events were segregated. For example, separate ceremonies were held for Memorial Day and the Nakba. Children were not encouraged to attend the other group's ceremony. When one of the Palestinian children persistently requested and was ultimately allowed to participate in the Jewish commemoration ceremony, his father in a later interview stated, "I knew where I was sending his son, but when hearing what had happened, I was shocked. I did not expect my child would do something like this. I need to think about the future." In the kindergarten, our recordings clearly show that the children, regardless of their ethnic affiliation, exhibited the same affinity to Palestinian and Jewish teachers. The children approach and hug their teachers and follow directives regardless of their teachers' ethnic identities. Even when discussing theological issues, alignment was not along ethnic or religious lines. For example, Ari, a Jewish boy, asked his friends sitting near him, a Muslim, a Christian, and another Jew, "Who believes in God?" Then he immediately added, "I don't believe in God because I believe we came from the monkeys." The Christian Palestinian boy Basil answered in agreement, "Me too, I believe we came from the monkeys and do not believe in God either." All the children reacted with agreement to this statement. Even when children recriminated each other, they never invoked ethnically denigrating innuendos when naming the guilty party. This is not to say that children have no consciousness of or respect for their ethnic religious affiliation. In fact, they have an awareness and even feel free to play with their identities. For example, on one occasion, Olfat and Nadia, two Palestinian girls, were playing together with Noah, a Jewish girl. Olfat told one of the researchers that Noah is an Arab. To which Noah responded by saying, "She is lying, I'm really Jewish." After this, they all laughed and continued playing cards undistracted. In another example, Chaim, a 9-year-old Jewish boy, was well known for his efforts to fast with the Muslim students during Ramadan. All the children knew him as an exception, but he did not seem to suffer from negative peer consequences for this decision. That said, teachers usually actively marked Chaim's behavior. When the Palestinian and Jewish teachers blessed the children in the morning with the traditional Ramadan Kareem, they added, "And to you, Chaim, too." There seemed to be a double play in these short statements. First, by drawing explicit attention to Chaim each morning, they seemed to actively mark the fact that there was one Jewish exception to the unsaid rule against crossing identity borders. Second, this comment demonstrated a liberal perspective by offering active recognition to the choice of the child who, in this case, preferred to cross such a border. Teaching religious festivals creates similar difficulty. El, a Jewish teacher in a first-grade classroom, was conducting a short introduction to the Pesach festival. Until this point, the children had been referring to the festival by its name, without linking it to a specific group's culture. This pattern does not mean that the children did not know its connection to Judaism. Instead, they did not mark it in their discourse. The Jewish teacher was the one who emphasized the Jewish specific nature of Pesach. Who chooses to celebrate, celebrates. But it is a festival of the Jews, and not a festival of either Muslims or Christians. Though it is one of Christians too, right? For the teachers in the integrated school in Israel, dealing with national and religious issues is a complicated task. These topics are never dealt with as information, but as central ideological elements of a curriculum with a declared twofold goal of supporting integration towards coexistence and safeguarding and strengthening individual identity and sense of belonging to each original group. The children might easily relate to and learn about a variety of ceremonies, festivals, texts, and other cultural or national artifacts. Teachers, however, seem always to try to ensure that individual children understand to which group and traditions they are connected. Identity culture, then, is treated in a complex fashion. The teachers simultaneously reify the idea of clear group differences while implicitly sanctioning a student's choice of traverse the identity cultural border. The attitude of adults and children seems to reflect very different understandings of the construct of identity and its relevance within the social context. Adults seem to be captive to hegemonic, essentialized identity perspectives that create, in part, the protracted nature of the very conflict they are trying to resolve. Young children do not seem to hold to an understanding of identity as a boundary marker. Given the examples I have shown, it becomes apparent that neither the global nor the local work necessarily towards the easing of borders, especially not those which have the potential to create conflict. The lasting question that lies at the core of this research, and indeed any research on identity formation and issues of difference, prejudice, and conflict, is whether the global or the local can model the backgrounding of ethnic, religious, cultural identity instead of foregrounding it. What can make the difference? What can bring solace to tensions guided by marketable identities and commodified cultures in a globalized world? Partially, at least, I would argue that not the local, the global, or the local are the issue. The main problem seems to be our foundational paradigms in that which relates to identity culture. I want to suggest we need to work towards a radical change of our epistemologies, the ones that guide our perspectives on incorporated identities and commodified culture. The question is how? When trying to answer this question, I ask you to imagine a child approaching a teacher and asking, what is a Jew or what is a Palestinian? The teacher may be inclined to offer as a response some culturally descriptive and benevolent characteristics of the groups in question. This response might seem appropriate for those working under the assumption of local border relaxation, which our examples have shown not to be so relaxed. However, I believe that such a response reinforces rather than challenges the basis on which interethnic conflicts develop in the first place. A better answer would be a correction of the epistemological basis that, though potentially unknown to the child, substantiate his or her question. Thus, a more appropriate answer might be, Palestinian Jews are not a what, but a when and a how. What I suggest is a move in educational practice away from epistemologies that emphasize the notion of reified and abstract views of identity and education. Instead, I argue for understanding identities as negotiated definitions that recognize individuals as co-participants in complex socio-historical political contexts. I recognize this step away from what, which is content, a magical, unexplained word in education, and let us keep that in mind, but if anyone has a good definition for content, and towards when and how, which is processes, the word we know the least about in education, as necessary but not entirely sufficient. Putting an emphasis on the constituted nature of identity does not offer solace in conflict situations where deep suffering arises from rigid labels of identity that create a marginalized status with very real consequences. We need more. We need to allow the social to predominate over the ideological without ignoring the power relations involved, which often make the social and the ideological difficult to distinguish. We need to help our children become ingenious about the ways in which social categories are constructed and engineered by political, and I would add, research contexts. We need to teach our students to become artists of the sign, explorers who uncover the ways society is organized and have the knowledge and skills to envision alternative designs. Helping our students expose the ways present societies are organized entails making visible the flattened, psychologized topography of identity theorizing, while helping them recognize the crucial influence of local, nation, global-making structures in the shaping of local and individual and group identities. Finally, I want to suggest two main directions for future work. The first relates to the need to seriously research children's subculture and the ways in which they organize the world through more flexible identity categories than the ones dictated by present national paradigms. The second relates to the need to consider how these new understandings could influence curricular undertakings. Sustaining children's cultures is a possibility adults need to consider, especially if they offer openings for overcoming some of the greatest ailments that trouble our society and are conducive to engaging in tractable conflicts. As researchers, when considering the roles of identity and culture in globalized contexts, we need to be careful of uncritically adopting ready-made theoretical discourses. We cannot give up on actual empirical research to uncover the trends which evolve in the intersection between the local and the global. Globalization theory, interest in cross-border flows between nation-states and regions, and insistence that nation-states are becoming an outdated unit of analysis should not make us overlook local processes which are more complex than those taken into account by traditional, somewhat romanticized social sciences perspectives. Globalizing processes are not unidirectional. They craft negotiations between the global and the local, which outcomes are never final. For whatever our ideological position is, for or against the creation of hybrid identities and cultures, we need to remember that such a discourse is produced within the limits of both global and local forces, which, if not confronted, co-opts any other possible direction. I want to leave you with a question which bothers me a lot and which might become the name of my next book. The question goes back to Nasehi and his observation that there is no global and there is no local, just the observer's perception of it. Could it be that children's perceptions are global and adults frame the local in the world? If so, we should seriously consider what happens when adults find solutions to problems children do not have. Thank you very much. But you're not obliged.
Comments, some questions. Not all together, one by one. Do I see somebody? So I'd like to have one remark. Stand up and use the modern technology.
I'd like to at least ask your opinion on the fact that a lot of cognitive and neurocognitive research actually shows that children do racial profiling and classification in quite an early age, even before the age of preschool education, to which these, for example, intercultural or interethnic schools relate to their students. So in a sense, it might be said that it is almost an inherent or an essential, if we are allowed to say such a rude adjective, quality of human and children's thinking to classify into the most salient categories. So it's very strange to say that it is adults which are creating the problems which students don't have at all in their minds. I wonder if you could relate it in some way beyond the notion that you're not using these methods.
You have a mic.
Look, I do not discuss the fact, and I emphasized it in my presentation, children know difference. The problem is if they attach negative values to it, if they make use of them to do negative or positive things. Of course children know differences. Without difference, humans do not exist, okay? It's the very basic element of humanity, being able to make difference. Now, the problem we have is that we immediately attach within a political context to ethnic, cultural, national identities, difference as a negative difference. Okay? So realizing difference does not necessarily mean, and the fact in my research and other people's research is that though they realize the difference, they're not making use of it. They use other differences, such as, for example, you're naughty, you're bothering me, stop it. Okay? When some activity takes place that they don't like, they do not have to attach it to Jewish, Palestinian, or Greek and Jew. Doesn't matter. So that's my answer. Let us not confuse the possibility of all humans to to understand difference, okay, with what value they attach to difference, okay? That there are differences, it's always true. The question is what world gets organized and how to pay attention to certain differences and not others. That's the real question. Why do we organize a world in which Palestinian and Jew is the paid attention to difference and not, for example, moving my finger like this? It's the same type of difference. So that would be my answer.
I have a question.
Why?
One question. If it relates to the global, mainly to the theoretical conception, you said now that we are asking why and how. How would you react to the idea that when we talk about global, we talk about an oxymoron in which you have many examples, like when we have networks, open networks, which I can call them publicized self-identity, an oxymoron, or individual collectivity, or if I might call it competitive cooperation, or disciplined creativity, which is a whole family of oxymorons which fits the local idea, which is a perceptual phenomenon.
I won't defend the word global. Social scientists find themselves in need of new words to create new fields to research. So don't ask me to defend global. I was asked to speak about the global and the global and the local and the global. So I find a way to do it, but I want to defend the word global more than local and global. Because local and global defines specific entities, and the global obliges you, at least, to move in an in-between. And I think that perceiving an interaction through the possible meaning of a word is much better than understanding it as a trait. So in that sense, I like global, but I still won't defend it.
Okay. If there are no any other questions, I would want to thank you, Tzvi. There is another question, okay.
כן, יודע.
How translate to Hebrew?
Global.
גלוקלי.
No.
יש לנו תוכנית באוניברסיטה שנקראת גלוקל.
That's not good. It's not easy to explain to the public.
You're asking the wrong person. I mean, I'm elite. אני יכולה להציע משהו? צר לי. בפולנית גלוקל, גם אומרים גלוקל.
The Palestinian children were Israeli Arab citizens? Or?
Yes. Yes. And most of them. In the Jerusalem school, we have a few that come from East Jerusalem, but most of them are, yeah.
Okay. We call them Arab Israelis.
Depending who the we is. You know that as well as I do. Oh my God, Baruch.
I would like to ask you about the cultural roots of families who send the children to these schools. I have the intuition that for the Jews and for the Arabs, the aims of the families are a bit different, but perhaps I'm wrong. For the Jews, it seems that it is more political. It is, and for the Arabs, it seems to me that it is more practical to succeed in the Israeli society. So I would like to, first of all, to ask if it is true, and whether in the discourse of a classroom you can see these differences.
I think you're right in a sense. I think that understanding which parents choose to send their children to these schools is much more complex than admitting the fact that Palestinians do not have good options where to send their children. That's why they send them to this type of schools, because our government has worked hard to make the Arab educational system not good enough for the most part. So here you have an option. And I think you're right again when you say that Jews might have ideological reasons, by which you mean that they belong to the center left of the political map. But I want immediately to tell you, you'll be surprised that some do not. So there are other reasons why to send. Please remember, for example, that these are special type of schools. They cost money. So maybe better than speaking about Palestinians and Jews, we should speak about poor and rich. And then you create a new commonality, which makes a lot of sense, by the way. Okay? So there are plenty of ways of defining them, and according to the definition you use in your research, you end up offering different results. For the time being, I'll offer you 2-3 papers on parents. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, please.
3 minutes left. 2 minutes left.
I hope you want to ask a question. Okay. I want one more question. Okay, this is good. Aaron Yadlin was our former Minister of Education. Not former, when I was young. Many thanks to our presenter.
Now you're 7, now it's 18.
Many thanks to Bekrman, and thanks for you coming here to listen, and we hope that we get some new thoughts, taking home some new thoughts. See you in a couple of minutes, because we are on time. Thank you.
Thank you.